Okay, great. I again, as a health service researcher, I oftentimes I think about, what the personality of the journal is really important. I think for me, the journal, the American Journal of Public Health is probably the most recognized journal in the public health field because it's associated with the American Public Health Association, which for the room is such a diverse group. For those who don't know, the APHA is the professional organization for all public health workers. In fact, APHA is actually a plaintiff on a number of lawsuits currently involved with the current administration. Um, with that in mind, that association is our publisher, but we have a very hard firewall between what the association does as advocates and what the journal does in terms of its publication on scholarly work. Oftentimes, AJPH is now at a point where we're trying to figure out where the science begin and end and where politics begins. And we are right now in conversations with all the associate editors to try to figure that out. I think it's important to kind of see as kind of future scholars to think where we are and how we apply science. Scientists, at least quantitative science, we brag about objectivity and being unbiased, balanced. But there's also this branch of science where it's heavily qualitative. Some of them are also normative essays. Public health includes law and ethics. So there's certain values that we also carry in our writings and we constantly struggle in terms of what is considered biased and what is considered not biased. Um, I also want to say that, public health for those in the public health world, the journal covers a variety of topics from epidemiology, biostats, health services research, policy, law and ethics, global health, environmental health, maternal child health, infectious chronic diseases. So it's so broad that we only accept 6% of our submissions. And we pride ourselves to really work on doing our reviews super timely so to make sure that folks who are interested in submitting their work to us, that they're getting the decisions quickly, even if it's a disappointing decision as a rejection. Um, we the focus of AJPH, the American Journal of Public Health, is also public health. Oftentimes we do get submissions where the endpoint isn't always the population or community health. I was very surprised sitting in and start triaging all the papers. Oftentimes that the paper's outcome is not even about health. So just be very careful in terms of when you look at different journals that it's squarely within the mission or the scope of the journal. Um, I think a little bit about kind of some of the pointers. I know this probably come out in the Q&A, but I think I'd like to urge everyone who's considering publishing at AJPH that follow the instructions. We have instructions online. It could be improved. We're actually going to work on that. But pay attention to what type of papers we accept, whether it's research or notes from the field or some of the qualitative sections. So that requires a lot of kind of triaging and kind of returning the papers back to the authors. So be careful with that. I think get to really know who are on the editorial board, and also pay attention because I think knowing who the editors are on the journal helps because those are the folks who are triaging and refereeing your papers. And if they are outside the scope of our expertise, likely that it'd be very likely that they'll be rejected, even if they are super good. So for example, we don't have a health economist on our editorial board. I'm actually working on identifying one right now. But that's something to be cognizant of because you may have a great paper, but we just don't have the expertise to review those papers. I think finally, I just want to say, for me as editor-in-chief, one of the things I look for is, will this paper be on the New York Times, newspaper? Is it going to be covered by some high-profile media where it's going to really highlight the work that we choose to publish? So that's kind of where I would say my final advice for anyone interested in submitting to this journal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dennis. Next, I'm going to go to Donald Tomaskovic of the ASR.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. So it's Tomaskovic-Devey. I'm at University of Massachusetts, and with David Court and Laurel Smith-Dorr, co-edit the American Sociological Review. It's also a journal that's affiliated with a professional association, the American Sociological Association. I don't think that's too important from thinking about submission or what the journal does. Other than the journal does represent the kind of, or tries, I don't know that we succeed, tries to represent the breadth of research being done by sociologists or people who are akin to sociology. So, so that is, we publish quantitative work with a lot of large language models these days, experimental work, qualitative work, old-fashioned survey analyses. What I think is distinctive is that the papers that get into ASR typically are very high quality on both the theory and the method side. That is, high quality data and high quality analytic choices. And we're usually looking for some contribution beyond a narrow subfield or substantive research question. So there's a kind of a breadth there that we're looking for. And I sort of want to echo one of the things that Dennis just said. That means if we reject a paper, it's not because of, sometimes it is because the paper is bad, but mostly it's because it doesn't kind of rise to that level of breadth. Yeah, so I think that's a little bit, I don't know, I think there's tons of details that could probably are better put in the Q&A about how we do our work. I underline what Dennis said, that one of the most important things is be familiar with the kinds of papers that are already being published in the journal. And that doesn't mean the kind of paper that's exactly the substantively closest to your paper. It usually would be good just to look at recent issues and see how people, thank you. My granddaughter just gave me a piece of chocolate. To see how people handle the way they describe their methods, or how they deal with open access, how they provide data for other people, or script, code, how they put together a theoretical story. So I have one last thing. This is something that an encounter I had last week, which I had decided was going to be my story for right now. So I'm on a project where we're doing vignette experiments embedded in surveys. With 3 German scholars who are really, really good at this work. And as such, because they're experimentalists, are really interested in kind of the average treatment effect. What's the kind of can we identify some causal effect? And we were talking about, well, where should we submit this paper? And one of the things they were saying, well, you know, the problem with, from their point of view, kind of general sociology journals in the US, as opposed to in other places, is that we're often looking for a stronger kind of theoretical narrative, wondering about heterogeneity in the real world and the like, which they saw as kind of an imposition on the paper. Now, that would be relatively easy to understand. You could read lots of experimentalist work in ASR, but when you do it, you'll see it's got that, it doesn't stop with an average treatment effect. It's got some larger story, often both within the data and externally. All of which is to say, there's a lot of different journals out there. And the one that's the peak journal in your field may not be the right one for your paper. It might be a good one for your career, but it might not be the right one for your paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Donald. And next, I'm going to go to Melissa Mary, Senior Associate Editor at the Policy Studies Journal.
Okay, can everyone hear me? All right. So my name is Melissa Mary, and I'm a professor of political science at the University of Louisville. And I am a senior associate editor with the Policy Studies Journal, and I have been working on the editorial team for about 4 years. And the Policy Studies Journal is basically the premier journal in public policy theory. We're associated with the public policy section of the American Political Science Association. And our sort of intellectual identity has been advancing policy process theory. So typically, we are looking for papers that are not only applying policy process theories, but are innovating in some way and advancing theory in some way. And that said, since I have been with the journal, we have actually expanded our focus a little bit, and we're now publishing more than we ever have. So in 2024, we published 51 articles, which was a 70% increase from the previous year. And part of that is because we have created sort of what we call a rolling special issue, where we've basically expanded the scope a little bit to include pieces that are simple applications of theory, so we don't necessarily require that theoretical innovation. We're also welcoming manuscripts that would potentially previously been more associated with public administration or political science more generally, and also studies that have null results. So we sort of opened the door a little bit in PSJ, and that has meant that, of course, we're not only publishing more, but we're getting a lot more submissions. So we're on track to exceed 600 submissions this year. So it's a lot, and we're also fairly highly rated. We have a site score of 12.3, putting us at number 20 out of nearly 1,500 journals in sociology and political science. And the impact factor was just released. We're at a 4.9, putting us at number 12 out of 322 journals in political science. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Another interesting thing we have initiated, and this has been a couple years now, is a blog. So we invite basically everybody who publishes with our journal to participate in the blog. We make it easy for authors. We actually draft a post for you basically a summary of your published research in the journal. And that's a way for you to sort of expand the reach of your research and to just get broader attention to it. So it's really designed to make your work accessible to not only scholars, but to a lay audience, and to potentially just get you more citations. And so since that blog has been in place, that we have seen over 15,000 unique visitors and over 25,000 views to the blog. So it's psjblog.net. So I'm really proud of that. And I have, I can offer all kinds of advice as far as publishing. Generally, it probably will echo a lot of the things that other people have already said, but I'll just go ahead and end my comments there.
Thank you very much, Melissa. That's excellent as well. And now we'll have John Gerring from the American Political Science Review.
Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks so much, Rob. I assume you can all hear me. Okay. Our team took over at the APSR about a year ago. And so I guess we have a little bit of experience under our belts, although we still feel like we're stumbling along and learning something new every day, trying to figure things out, trying to figure out a protocol that we're comfortable with. It's a huge number of manuscripts, as I'm sure everyone is aware. We have a large team, 16 editors. Monica Nalepa and I are the co-lead editors, but we don't really do much aside from convene the group and try to moderate discussions and reach agreements on policies. But most of the decisions are done by the handling editors. I think since time is limited, I'll use my my couple of minutes to inform people that we have a variety of tracks that are now available, some of which are very new and might not be familiar to you. So, there are now 5 tracks. There's the regular article. There's something we call a research note, which is very similar to what used to be called letters. There is a track for registered reports, a format that I imagine most people are familiar with, and we'll run it. We are running it in a fashion that's very similar to JEPS and JOP and other journals that have a registered reports track. We just instituted a track called Synthesis, which is for papers that try to come to terms with a broad field, summarizing literature, but going beyond the traditional literature review. Usually we expect there to be some empirical work, as well as delving into matters of theory with the overall goal of accumulating knowledge. And I guess I think about the Journal of Economic Literature as being something of a model in this respect, which we don't really have, at least not in quite the same way in political science. I should also say that we're running that track a little differently than the others. We will accept proposals that come in the form of a prospectus as opposed to completed syntheses, and we will review them once a year in September. So the deadline for submission is September 1st. And if anyone's interested, you can just go ahead and submit, or if you have questions about the process, you can look online for more information or contact one of us. And finally, we have a track for replications and reappraisals. This refers, of course, to papers that revisit a previously published result, a previously published paper in the APSR, or potentially in other journals if it's an important paper. And we will, I think, at some point in the not too distant future, begin a process of soliciting randomly chosen papers published at the APSR for replication or reappraisal. The idea here is to, by randomizing the process, to try to get a handle on a question that we all struggle with, which is, how reliable is political science research? When you look only at replications, you tend to come away with a very negative impression about the progress of our field. And the only way to really get a more balanced view, I think, is to have some sort of randomized process of selection. So that's what we're aiming for in the not too distant future. Happy to answer any questions you might have. I will pass the baton to the next person.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate that. And we definitely do have questions, and we'll get some more as we go on. But one more presentation from co-editors of the American Journal of Political Science, Adam Berinsky and Dan Reiter. They're 2 people, but 1 journal, so they get the same 6 minutes to divide as they like.
Yeah, hey there. I'm Dan Reiter. I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then Adam's going to add comments. Adam and I are thrilled to be here. We're both University of Michigan PhDs. I am also an Ann Arbor native and former ICPSR student and ICPSR employee working in the library under the great Hank Heidewit from many years ago. We are the co-editors of the American Journal of Political Science. AJPS, like APSR, is a general journal, so we publish articles from across the breadth of political science, all subfields. Though we publish political science articles, we also publish work done on political science by scholars who are not themselves political scientists in other social science fields. For example, we get some great submissions from economists who look at questions like how do trade flows affect voting behavior, for example. Now, for the first, building on a point that John made somewhat, for the first time, AJPS is going to publish shorter manuscripts, what we're calling research notes, 4,000 word limit, and we are considering for publication papers which are either focused on issues of methodology or are meta-analyses. I want to make a couple other points about AJPS before passing it over to Adam. One thing that Donald, I think, alluded to a little bit is something that journals call the desk reject process. And so sometimes, we'll get papers and submissions, and sometimes we will desk reject them, which means that we will reject them without sending them out for review. Now, for everybody out there, that sounds horrible. You're like, oh my God, you're not even giving me the chance. This is such a mean thing to do. But what I would like to stress, and I hope Donald, John would agree, and everybody else, is that this is something which actually is to your benefit, in the sense that, if we look at a paper and we're fairly confident that reviewers are not going to recommend it for publication, everybody's better off if we cut the review process short. It's much better for you if you know it's not going to get it published at our journal within a week rather than a couple of months. I also want to stress a point that Donald made, is that a lot of times we get submissions which are very well executed papers, maybe very well executed empirics, but there just isn't enough theoretical innovation. And so for papers like that, we say we're going to desk reject it. This is more appropriate, for a subfield journal or a specialty journal. So if you get a desk reject, please, don't feel insulted. This is for your own benefit, and it's so the journals can function a little bit better. I'm going to make one more point, then pass it off to Adam. Adam and I actually have less control over the review process than you might think. We really work with what, reviewers expect to see. And one thing that I want to sort of stress in terms of empirical papers is that reviewers expect that empirical papers in political science pay very close attention to issues of causal inference. And so whatever empirical method that you use, experimental, observational data, what have you, it's very important that you think very carefully about whatever causal inference strategy that you take. Because my experience, and I've been an associate editor at AJPS since 2020, is that reviewers have high expectations for that in particular. I'm going to stop there and pass it over to Adam to add any other comments.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Eddie. Just a couple of quick things. Well, first of all, I want to say that I was also an ICPSR library worker. I'm assuming that the library no longer exists, but RIP. But it's great to be here. I think, Donnie and the other editors have made a whole bunch of great points. I think, one thing to think about as a scholar is thinking about a portfolio of journals for your publication record, not so much as a strict hierarchy where, sort of thinking, in political science, they often talk about the top three, APSR, AJPS, JOP. But I think, in many regards, journals that are more specialized are more likely to find an audience in your subfield. And think about contributions that, just because something gets desk rejected at a journal doesn't mean it's not a good paper, as Donnie was saying. It just might not be the best for a general audience, but it might find a really good home in a specialized journal. So, I'm a political behavior scholar. I publish in POQ, political behavior. these are really great outlets. They're not lesser outlets, they're just more specialized. So I think it's really important to think about that and to sort of think about, as a scholar, how you want to kind of work through your portfolio of manuscripts. And the other thing I would say is that it's just really important to have a thick skin, not in terms of taking, sort of like sometimes you'll get reviews that are not polite, and there's as editors, I think it's our job to help kind of soften that blow. But I think, just in general, getting a paper rejected, whether it's a desk reject or it goes out for review, is a painful thing. I've been in this field for quite some time, and it's still when I get papers rejected, I'm like, oh, that sucks. But just kind of turning around, but that editors are, as editors, so Donnie and I have only been in this job 6 weeks, though Donnie has had experience as an associate editor. Our job is to find the best reviewers, the most appropriate reviewers for a manuscript. And I think as an author, I think it's really important to take that feedback that you get back from the reviewers to heart. But even if you don't like what they have to say, it can help improve the quality of the manuscript as it moves to different journals and ultimately finds a home there. So that's all I had to say. And with that, back to you, Rob.
Thank you to all of our panelists. Absolutely excellent. And you kept to time, at least in aggregate. So well done. So we're going to open it to questions. Team, do we have some in the chat that we want to start with? No. Okay. The room. All right. There we go. And I'm going to be running around the room. Well, actually, no. My ankle just decided.
So this is kind of for all of the journal editors, but obviously we do the double-blind review process to prevent bias from entering the review process. How, with the increasing desk rejections, do you balance bias and saving everyone's time? Thank you.
So any of the editors, go ahead and unmute yourselves if you'd like to address.
Yeah, I guess I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more of the question. It's an interesting topic, but I'm not sure I understand it completely. Are you concerned, and I apologize if I'm mischaracterizing your point, that there might be bias within the desk reject process? Is that your concern? And please correct me if I'm wrong.
Like there could be, right? Like the data suggests that like most articles, at least in political science, are like published by either all male or solo male authors. Not to say that you guys are sitting there, with a crystal ball, but more so of like, considering that the desk reject isn't a blind process, like how do you make sure that you're being even-handed?
I'm happy to take a shot at that. I actually study bias, and I'm a scientist, which means I worry about different types of bias, right? Sampling bias, estimation problems, and the like. I think what we do is our best to get the right set of reviewers, to make sure we for the reviewers get some heterogeneity in on the basis of kind of where they are in the social world. Hopefully they also match the paper well. The idea, though, that you want that as someone who's developing your papers, you probably don't want to spend too much time worrying about, is the world biased against you? Because you're going to get most of your papers rejected at first, and then you're going to work on them some more. And really, the powerful thing for you is to stick to it and learn either from the desk rejections or the normal rejections or the revise and resubmits how to strengthen the work. You should go after the part you can control. And that would be my advice to anybody coming up in this system. It does require a thick skin. The ASR, or it's not because of ASR, it's the American Sociological Association, is now tracking kind of the gender and race composition of reviewers through SAGE. I haven't actually seen any of the data yet. This is and this is true also when we make our editorial board appointments. It's tracked by the association to kind of make sure the editorial board doesn't all look like me. Which is not merely white male, but old white male. Um, so I know we do what we can, but you should be most attentive to the stuff that you control, would be my advice.
So I want to chime in on that as well. In terms of the biases of the authors, we don't, although it's unblinded, I would say the bias may be associated with other factors. So therefore, the demographics of the individual may be biased towards that. So for example, we do favor to a certain degree when the study is funded by the federal government, NIH funded or CDC funded. So oftentimes if the bias is introduced there because they don't have enough investigators who can get these grants, then I will say yes, the bias are inherited in that factor, because for us, if it's NIH funded, we know that there was a process prior to submitting the papers. I think there is definitely bias towards academic institution as opposed to community-based. Public health, we pride ourselves not just favoring those in academic institutions, but also other research entities that, are not associated with a big university. Oftentimes the resources availability, oftentimes if it's small NGOs or nonprofits that are writing research papers, they often limited in scope, limited generalizability. As a result, we also do not favor small studies because our focus is on the national level. And so the resources it takes to do that also biases towards in big organizations. So the biases, I would say, come into that level. And so then it really depends. So I would say the bias doesn't occur at the authorship level for us.
Yeah, I'd like just to say a couple of things about this important issue. I mean, Adam and I, we are very attuned to this issue, and we've taken steps to address it, but we don't pretend like, it's gone away or we've magically solved it. Let me just talk about a couple of things that we've done. So a lot of the desk reject decisions are made by associate editors, and we've strived to have a demographically diverse set of associate editors. Another way, one way that bias can creep in is through networks, professional networks. And so for us, an associate editor will not handle a paper from someone within their network. That's our conflict of interest policy. So when I was an associate editor, for example, I would not handle a paper that was written by one of my co-authors or one of my students. So that helps a little bit. Also, when Adam and I came in, this is a little bit orthogonal to your point, but I'll make it anyway, is that, Adam and I believe that it's important that AJPS continue to publish quality research on race, ethnicity, and politics, REP. And, in pursuit of that goal, we deliberately have one of our associate editors being an REP, specialist, right? And so that helps maybe avoid another kind of bias, which hopefully isn't around anymore, which is traditional Americanists like not thinking REP work is worth, publishing. So, that's kind of a potential source of bias that we directly, wanted to push against and make sure there's space at HAPS for important REP work.
I'll just chime in. So there are two other senior associate editors at PSJ, and they're both female. So, we've had a lot of conversations about bias within the editorial team. So it's something we're aware of, and we're actively trying to solicit manuscripts that maybe address like a geographic region, a country that hasn't been well represented in policy research before. So we're working on it constantly. Let's see, I had one other thing to say. Oh, I did want to reiterate that when one of us has, there's like somebody who was a former graduate student, or there is like a personal relationship there, when we're making those desk decisions, anyone who has a potential conflict just extracts himself from that decision.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate all that feedback. It is a great question because clearly the desk evaluation process is not blind. And so whatever reasons we had for double blind would be implicated there. And editors, I'm not currently an editor, but I have been, being aware of that is a first start on that important issue. I want to take something that Dan mentioned. And use it to segue to a question that we solicited before, and that is about specific topics that may be of issue. So the question goes like this: in light of the current administration's ban on health equity, how are journals handling manuscripts with banned words or in touchy topics or areas in the current environment? I'm sure there might be people who would want to speak to that.
Maybe
I think John has his hand up. I don't know.
yeah, John has his hand up. Yeah, we should acknowledge that first.
Perhaps.
John, did you want to go? Is it unmuting? Maybe while you're trying to figure out the unmuting, given the health equity was kind of part of the conversation, I may just kind
I
of
think it was
first.
directed. Dennis, you go ahead. I think John's auto recognize might have failed there.
So let us know if you want to chime in, John. I'm going to just quickly answer. We're not staying away from it. The American Journal of Public Health is certainly not. I mean, our latest August issue is on actually LGBT health at the global stage, especially looking at the legal prosecutions against LGBT rights and health. So we have another one coming up on transgender health, actually coming out in November issue. So we are definitely not shying from it, but we also recognize that we are the outlet. We're not those, we're not at the upstream helping, figuring out how to work with researchers to continue that work. I wasn't the editor-in-chief yet, but Alfredo Marabia was the former editor-in-chief that ended last month, and his term ended last month, and he basically stood by not allowing papers that were already accepted in the production to withdraw the authorship or to rewrite the papers. As you know, the executive order for basically forbid all federal workers, and as a former federal worker, part of CDC, we had to withdraw any papers with DEI or transgender and health equity written in our manuscripts. The position of that journal, of Alfredo, excuse me, for the journal was that to keep the scientific integrity, we really cannot let the administration dictate what is allowed and not allowed to be published, and for scientific integrity as well. I don't know if I would do the same thing. I may modify that by essentially having been part of CDC just up to like last month. My employment is at risk here. So if I was a federal as a federal employee, I would be reprimanded for having that publication come out with those words when the journal is not allowing me to edit. But I would probably be transparent and edit it and then put a big flag on it, basically saying the administration has requested this to be changed due to the executive order. So I think there are different ways to acknowledge it, but I'll tell you again, I will look at the journal and what's been published since the new administration is in office. I think it's very telling of where the journals are going, and but I definitely can understand how certain journals are more protective of their authors and their staff at this point.
John, would you like to chime in?
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't able to unmute previously. I was going to come back to the previous point about bias, because I think there are any number of different biases or things that some people would call a bias. The issue that I would say we struggle most with on the journal is not necessarily one I would have anticipated. And I'm not sure how other journal editors feel about this or what other people's experiences are. But it seems to be the case that some reviewers are just very enthusiastic about their subject matter. You know, they want to see more work about X. And others, you know, are you know, just very reticent and taciturn, and they're not that excited about this particular subject that they're an expert on. And there is some correlation with methodological sophistication. If you've got a really fancy method and you send it to a methodologist or a formal theorist, you know, those people are they're very hard on each other, and it's very hard to get things passed. And I don't know exactly, you know, what the underlying sociology of knowledge is, but it's just a pattern. Whereas if it's a subject where people who are doing this are really enthusiastic about it, they're promoters, if you will, they're boosters, then it's much easier to get through the review process. And I feel that lends a real unfairness to the process in a way that is self-perpetuating and that we have to struggle against, although it's not entirely clear how one does that as an editor.
As a methodologist, I feel that comment very much and take it, endorse it wholeheartedly. Could think about that as you're doing reviews, that it might not be advantageous to always have the knives out as your primary goal. Do we have a question in the chat? Do we? Yep.
All right. Timothy, thank you for submitting this question. He asked, journals and academia more generally sometimes have the appearance of being rather siloed. Whether or not you believe this is a fair characterization, are there any good strategies for researchers whose research questions and/or methods cut across traditional disciplinary distinctions and may not fit neatly into the foci of many prominent journals, or for that matter, the disciplinary format conventions vis-a-vis breadth of background, theoretical perspectives, methodology, and/or evidentiary thresholds for considering pursuit of causal inference utilizing observational data?
At least in sociology, it's we don't have it. I don't see that level of kind of homogeneity, and though I often see graduate students speak as if there is. And it goes back to I think my advice would go back to what I said earlier, is you need to you have to find your people and your audience. And I have I really love strong methods, whether it's strong qualitative methods or strong quantitative methods or strong statistical and kind of causal analyses. And those will always help a paper. At the same time, there's a lot of different ways that people approach scientific research in the social sciences. If you're really wed to a particular approach, you have to find the other people who are wed to that approach. Maybe in a generalist journal, you can reach them if you signal strongly enough to the editors that there's a kind of a competent set of reviewers out there. And that probably won't be in your cover letter, but in how you use the literature. But if they're not in the journals you're looking at, then you're looking at the wrong journals.
Yeah, if I could say a couple things about this very interesting and important question. I'll make a couple of points. You know, one is, you know, if you feel like your paper is kind of not neatly fitting into a disciplinary tradition, think about how to use this as an asset rather than a liability, right? Because maybe the way to frame it is, I'm going to provide a fresh theoretical perspective on some established question. So for example, it might be something like, most people in political behavior have this view of how gender affects voting. But hey, I'm coming from gender studies, and hey, there's this like cluster of ideas outside of political science and gender studies, which is a completely fresh perspective. And I think I can speak for all of us that we all love new theoretical ideas. We love it, right? So think about turning what seems like a liability into an asset. The other point I want to make is the kind of the last phrase of the question: how do you handle evidentiary thresholds for considering pursuit of causal inference utilizing observational data? And let me just make kind of a broader point about utilizing observational data, and handling the causal inference question. One is obviously, do your best, whether it's using an instrument or matching or whatever else. The other point I want to make is that my experience is that reviewers will cut you more slack if you pull back on your claims of causal inference. So if all you have is observational data and you don't really have a good causal inference strategy because of the nature of the data and whatever, we all deal with this problem, reviewers will cut you slack if you, pull back on claims of causal inference, of causation. You just say, this is my data, I'm not able to really test causation, but here it is. And then you can say something like future work and use an experiment or something to really drill into causation. That's one way to kind of handle this, this frequent problem.
Yeah. Just to add to that, I think a lot about it is contextualizing your results, which is, I think, what a lot of people here are saying is, right, so where you get into trouble is saying like, oh, I can make these strong causal claims, sort of using this data, and then reviewers would be suspicious and say, well, I don't buy that. Even if you say like, oh, I'm not making causal claims, but the paper reads as if you're making causal claims, you're still in that same boat that can be dangerous. So I think, again, it's sort of, getting to a position where sort of that you're honest about your data, but not just honest in terms of, sort of the claims you're making, but how you're writing it up. And so I think a lot of the importance here is contextualizing, find your audience, sort of thinking about that in terms, as Donald said, a lot of that can be in terms of the authors that you're citing, right? It's kind of what literatures are you speaking to? I think that's also true in these interdisciplinary things, is like you don't want to have a paper that's sort of psychologically based that doesn't cite any political science research and send it to HAPS. What you want to do is have a mix and say like, right, here's the frontier where we can learn something new. Let me show you that because I can tie it to these separate literatures and really get some sort of thing here. So I think a lot of this is not just about like, are your results cool and neat, but how are you presenting that story as you're writing up the article?
Thank you again. We got one in the chat that echoes a question that several people submitted beforehand. In the chat, Irene puts it this way: how can one self-assess whether or not an article draft is ready for submission? Several others also asked, how do I decide or assess when an article is ready to submit? And Irene adds, and suppose an article was previously rejected, is it possible to resubmit to the same journal after significant changes?
Well, I can maybe say something about the latter. We're pretty strict about redundant submissions, but obviously there's a continuum, and sometimes we're asked to make some kind of a judgment about whether a paper is sufficiently different from something that had been previously reviewed, and we'll do that if it's not immediately clear. I don't know if they're hard and fast rules, but the theory should be different, or the empirics should be different, or both, just broadly speaking, if you're talking about a typical political science paper. We do have a process that we've used now, I think, more and more frequently, which is a desk reject with the option to resubmit. And we use this in cases where we think a paper has promise, but isn't quite ready to send out. If there are some obvious issues, maybe they have to do with framing, maybe there's some ambiguities about what's going on in the empirical analysis that need to be straightened out before we send it out to reviewers. we will send it back to the authors and ask them to, make some clarifications, rectifications, in some cases, additional tests, robustness tests, perhaps. And we find this is quite helpful. It speeds up the process because you don't have to wait for these things to arise in the review process. You can head them off, and sometimes they just aren't doable, and then that also saves authors and reviewers time.
I can also speak to the second question. We have definitely allowed people to submit a substantially revised version of a previously rejected paper. I can think of one paper that actually went through the review process and it was a rejection, and then the editor sort of communicated with the author and said, hey, we would welcome this as a new submission if you make some significant changes. But we are looking for that manuscript to be substantially revised. So that is always a possibility. As far as when is a draft ready for submission, probably I would say don't sit on the paper because you're worried that it's going to get rejected. And if you're sort of on the line deciding whether to send something out, I would say err on going for it and sending it out for review. The worst that happens is a desk rejection. And then the best that happens is maybe you don't get accepted for publication, but you get some good feedback and you have a path forward moving towards publication.
So if I can piggyback as well, it's interesting, as the editor-in-chief that does an initial triage, oftentimes it's, the rejection is based on scope, based on really fundamental issues that unless you go out and completely redo your data collection and your analysis and to a certain degree your conceptual work, it's not fitting for the journal. So for at least American Journal of Public Health, I would say if it's automatic rejection by the editor-in-chief, I would say probably not. If it did go through peer review and the associate editor decided to recommend a rejection as well as the peer reviewers, you get substantial comments back. Oftentimes, if the changes are so much that we will ask for, instead of asking for revision, we determine it should be rejected. There's reasons why those papers were rejected, because otherwise we probably would have allowed you to do major revisions. So there is a designation that we actually give to the authors that they can do major revisions. So if we do reject it, I think there is definitely reasons why we also do not see it fitting for the journal. So I just want to state that. I think regarding whether if a paper if it's still drafty, I think maybe a little different from Melissa. I'm taking it from the perspective of while I see, a way to kind of submit to a journal, see if you can get some feedback, and then if it gets rejected, at least you get the comments back and then improve it and resubmit it somewhere else. On the journal side, if I could be a little bit on the selfish, practical side, we don't want to be the one who's writing your paper. And so to that degree, especially for new folks, I obviously think, you want feedback from other people, but on the journal side, we probably like, this is so much work that so much burden is put on us. I don't know if we want to accept this now that, all this has gone through on our end. So think of that too, as you submit your papers.
So, I had on the first question about sitting on it, I think it's important that you have somebody else read your paper. And when I see a title page on a paper that doesn't thank anybody, it always gives me a little pause, like, oh, has anyone seen this paper except me and the author? And I don't know the answer to that question, but it does worry me. And so on the second part, on the after you've been rejected at ASR, we do not accept papers after they've been rejected by ASR. And part of our logic is this: we reject 90, whatever it is, 94%, 93% of the papers we get. Ridiculous, right? And so what we actually think is our big value added into social science is the reviews you get. It's the reviews that go to all the people who are rejected. Those are the things that you learn from and create good papers. Um, so in that sense, once it's been rejected at ASR, you've also used ASR's reviewers in order to improve your paper. Otherwise, we'd have this weird situation where everyone just came back. Um, and that's been my personal thing with my own submitting of papers. I assume when I send a paper out, it's going to be rejected. I'm going to get reviews. It'll help me move it somewhere else.
Yeah, can I just jump in with a couple quick points, Rob? Yeah, so generally AJPS, similar to ASR, if it's been previously rejected by AJPS, most likely we're not going to reconsider it. One other point I want to make about Irene's question is, this question of when is it ready for submission? Another question is, what journal are you submitting it to? There might be a paper that's ready for a subfield or specialty journal, but not ready for a general journal. And then the key question is, do I send it out to a subfield journal or do I spend more time on it and shoot for a general journal? And I stress this because your decision on that may be affected by professional, advancement concerns. If you're a grad student, you have to think about timing of the job market. If you're junior faculty, you have to think about coming up for tenure. And then you need to think about things like, how, do I have enough time to send it to a general journal, see it get rejected, and then have another chance to send it out to a subfield journal before I send my packet out to the job market. So that's obviously a very individual decision, set of consideration.
Thank you, and that's a perfect place to end because you addressed the other question that we had multiples of submitted beforehand. So let's thank our tremendous journal editor panelists. I'm clapping here. I don't know if you can see. I want to thank the journal editors as well for joining us. And I'm actually going to run immediately because I teach in 15 minutes in a room that is 20 minutes away. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.